completely failed to understand that the essence of the pro-democracy movement in the Arab world is about dismantling an old system and building a new one, and that he is offering these reforms just to buy time, and therefore they're just not going to listen to what he offers. But we have to give it some time to get a sense of which way the wind is blowing here in Yemen.
Okay, thanks, Hashim. Hashim Ahalbara there, reporting from Sana'a. Now, the battle for Libya shows no sign of letting up. State television has broadcast what it says are confessions of members of a criminal terrorist group linked to al-Qaeda. Colonel Gaddafi has blamed al-Qaeda groups for starting the uprising in Libya. The blindfolded men were said to be arrested in Ras Lanuf. In the oil hub of Ras Lanuf, forces loyal to Gaddafi bombed oil installations, including a pipeline and a storage facility. In AlJazeera, rebels say they've retaken control of the city. Pro-Gaddafi forces, seen celebrating here, deny that claim. Either way, a heavy bombardment from the air and on the front line on Wednesday saw some of the fiercest fighting yet. Doctors say dozens were killed. But in the northern coastal oil port city of Bin Jawad, rebels were not able to hold off the Libyan troops, pushed back by a heavy attack from the sea. For more on what's happening on the ground, let's go live now to Jackie Rowland, who's in the rebel-held eastern city of AlJazeera. And Jackie, this is a determined counter-offensive by Colonel Gaddafi's forces to retake those positions which were earlier taken by rebels. What is the status right now? We're hearing, of course, conflicting information from both sides.
What we appear to be witnessing now is the first really serious counter-offensive in the east by pro-Gaddafi forces. Up until now, we don't really feel that we've seen them unleash their full power. However, throughout the day on Wednesday, we saw intensive aerial bombardment. Previously, fighter aircraft, warplanes had come in and dropped, say, one bomb and then had retreated again. However, what we saw on Wednesday were bombers circling overhead for sustained periods of time and not making one or two bombing raids, but rather dropping a series of bombs. In the case of that oil storage depot at the port of AlJazeera, 4 bombs were dropped from the air onto the oil storage facility. But at the moment, we still are in something of a stalemate, despite the fact that there is this concerted counter-offensive by the pro-Gaddafi forces. The rebels are still digging their heels in and are doggedly fighting to hold on to the territory which they currently have.
I guess, Jackie, it's one thing for Gaddafi's forces to attack the rebels from the air, dropping bombs on them, but another thing for them to hold that territory that they want to regain from the rebels.
That is the problem, yes, because while the Gaddafi forces still have one major advantage, and that is air power, the rebels do enjoy broad support from the civilian population in the east. So while theoretically it might be possible for pro-Gaddafi forces to advance and actually defeat the rebel forces in certain areas of the east, the problem would be holding on to that territory. When you have a large civilian population such as the 1 million inhabitants of the city of Benghazi, citizens who have quite clearly really thrown their weight behind this rebellion, have openly and overtly mocked and rejected Muammar Gaddafi and embraced the symbols of the revolution, most particularly the revolutionary flag. It would be really difficult to see how pro-Gaddafi forces could hang on to a city like that. Certainly they would be faced with street-by-street fighting, urban warfare, and quite possibly also guerrilla tactics. So that is the real problem, the fact that they maybe have the upper hand in terms of military equipment, but in the east, clearly a large number of the people, and probably the majority, the vast majority, I would say, of the civilian population are supporting the rebel fighters, both morally and also logistically. Thanks, Jackie. Jackie Rowland there, reporting from AlJazeera in Libya. Well, the international push to tighten the noose on Colonel Muammar Gaddafi is stepping up. The Kremlin has announced a ban on Russian weapon sales to Libya. Moscow has signed $2 billion worth of contracts with another $1.8 billion warplane and missile deal in the pipeline. Let's get the latest now from our correspondent Neve Barker in Moscow. Neve, when we look at this decree that's just been announced by the Russians, how different is it from that resolution that was passed at the United Nations about 10 days ago? Is it just a reinforcement of that resolution, which of course does call for a weapons ban on Libya?
Yes, it is a reinforcement of the UN sanctions, the embargo imposed on weapons deliveries to Libya signed on February the 26th. This essentially is a presidential decree that enforces that embargo. In addition to the statements made at the UN at the end of February, now President Dmitry Medvedev has said on home turf that any cargo suspected of being delivered to Libya would be subject to very tight inspections. As you said there, Russia had very recently signed a series of deals with Libya. Firstly, a $2 billion arms deal with the country. And only last January, Libya's defense minister traveled to Moscow to begin negotiations for another $1.8 billion deal that, on top of small arms like Kalashnikovs, handheld weapons, also is believed to have included fighter jets, ground-to-air missiles, air defense equipment also. That, of course, is all now on hold. But if we also consider that Libya had been, in the second half of the 20th century at least, the biggest buyer of Russian weapons anywhere in the world, Russia had hoped with the opening up of the Libyan market that the country would also be another buyer, another reliable customer of Russian weapons within the modern years also. That clearly is not going to happen. The response from Moscow is one of deep concern over developments in Libya. They have warned the authorities there to desist in their current hold on power to avoid any further violence against the Libyan people.
All right, thanks, Neve. Neve Barker there from Moscow. And in Brussels, both the EU and NATO are holding talks about the issue of whether or not to take the option of the so-called no-fly zone. AlJazeera's Tanya Page is following events for us.
The next 48 hours will see frenetic activity, not only at the EU but here at NATO as well, the headquarters just behind me. A meeting is going to get underway in the next coming hours, and Libya, of course, is top of the agenda. Many of the military options will be discussed because nothing has been taken off the table, the most significant of which is the no-fly zone, or the potential of a no-fly zone. Now, that term can cover a broad range of options. Will it be a no-fly zone over the entire country, or would it be a narrow no-fly zone over the most populated areas? US Defense Secretary Robert Gates has said there's no point in a no-fly zone without going in and targeting the ground-to-air missile defences that Libya has, taking out those threats. There's no doubt NATO has the capability to launch a no-fly zone and to enforce it, but where there is the capability, there may not be the will just yet. There is not a unified front here at NATO. They are hoping to have as broad a base of support as possible. It ideally would come from some sort of UN resolution, but it isn't essential. However, they are also looking towards Gulf and Arab states to provide their support for any military action.
There are calls for political reform in the United Arab Emirates. 133 nationals have signed a petition calling on President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al